YouTube, you remember the recent video that I did about those even key parquet money in watches, something that kind of is sustainable throughout recession or whatever else, stable and easy? Well, I don't just talk about these things, I actually buy these things. So in today's unboxing, I'm going to show you a lot of cool special pieces. Stay tuned. TikTok is live. What's up, TikTok? And we're live on Instagram. Guys, I got a pretty cool one for you today. Hopefully you caught a recent YouTube video where we talked about recession-proof pieces, right? I don't just talk about the stuff, I actually go out and actively try to buy that stuff. Even though I'm a business, let's say, right? It doesn't mean that I don't also hedge my investments, if you will, and we have a lot of them, and they turn daily. So, a lot of cool stuff today, lots of special things today, a lot of cool pieces from Cartier, an oldie but a goodie from AP, probably one of my favorite limited edition offshores out there, along with a few other surprises. So I'm gonna jump right into this, and I'm gonna start with this guy, Cartier, and specifically Cartier CP Collection Prive, CP. CMP. It's a knee slapper, right, Cal? I bought a Cartier Tortue Monopusher, right? Single pusher chronograph. Well, I decided to, actually, you know what? I'm gonna show this one next. What we have here is the Cartier Tortue day and night. And the reason I wanted to come in a little bit closer is how the day and night indicator is actually displayed. Watch the moon and the stars, and there's your sun. It's extremely artistic the way they do these. Now let's move on to the next Tortue, and this one is even more special. So here's your Monopusher chronograph, right? Which is the Tortue that I showed you. And this one also happens to be a tourbillon. Extremely complicated movement. I believe they made 30 of these. Yep, they did. Original retail price on it was around 200,000. Now this is a watch that you pick up under 100,000, which makes me think that how can you not, especially considering who we know was involved in making the original Monopusher Cartier Tortue, and the likes of F. Journe, 𝗏𝗏, and all those other guys. But look at this thing, and now look at the back of it. This is a pretty serious machine. And it's, again, a serious value, definitely a future collectible. Because I said, Cartier is probably one of the most low-key collectible brands out there. Collection Prive is where you want to be, along with older tanks. Do tell, who said what?
Ionis says, why does he look like an iPad kid when he has the glasses on?
Like the who? The who kid? What's an iPad kid? I'm an iPad kid now. Does that make me younger? And this is the Rotonde perpetual calendar. Look at the way the perpetual calendar is actually displayed. You have your days of the week as a retrograde here, the months are here, the year here, the leap indicators here, the date is around. It's just a very untraditional way to display a perpetual calendar. From afar, if I showed you this thing, you'd be like, that's a perpetual calendar? Yes, this is a perpetual calendar. And again, one of those things that Cartier, in-house movements, all these things are in-house movements, Cartier executes these exceptionally well, and that's why I find a lot of horological value. Looks-wise, I think they're beautiful watches, and the name, I mean, Cartier. Last but not least, I'm going to show you, let me go to iPad kid route. I'm going to show you what's called a central chronograph from Cartier. And again, at a glance, if you didn't see these two buttons on the side, you wouldn't even think that this is a chronograph. But the way this chronograph works is actually pretty amazing. A very untraditional way to do a chronograph, but this is what Cartier tries to do year in and year out when they're talking about collection prive and things of that nature. And again, I'm impressed by this. That's why I buy these things, and that's why they sell, and that's why they sell well. Actually, our Tortue Monopusher chronograph just came back from service. I estimate it'll be gone within the next 3 to 4 days now that it's available for sale. With that said, let's talk about more calendars, right? One of the older annual calendars from Patek were the 50-35 annual calendar. Where else do you go to pick up an annual calendar from the brand that's the Rolls Royce of all brands, i.e. Patek Philippe, and you pick up a complication such as this in a precious metal for mid-20s. And that's really why I buy these things, because of the value, because of the name. And again, horologically, this is still an annual calendar. This is not, you know, just a watch that shows date and time. The other one for me, and one of my favorites, we just picked up a yellow gold one, and this is its white gold counterpart. White gold or platinum? White gold. White gold Saxonia from Lange. Now, Saxonia is that other line that people tend to forget about from Lange, and because it's one of those lines that's probably second to the Lange 1 line, it usually ends up being better deal versus the other. And to get a full-blown perpetual calendar, automatic, micro rotor, with all the finishing, with all the bells and whistles, with the watchmaking of Lange, which is absolutely amazing. To pick these things up, again, they're still hovering around that $50,000, $40,000 to $50,000 price range. I think it's a pretty unbelievable deal. It's a Moser. Yes, you can pick up a Moser for around in the low teens, right? Low to mid teens, and this is one of them. And again, you guys know about Moser, it's all about the dials. I'm gonna try to move this so you guys can see the play on that dial. And of course, the watchmaking behind Moser there's something to be said about that, but that's a whole other video. Besides, Marco's in Canada, so I'm not gonna geek out over this. All I'll tell you is that if you wanted to get into an independent, right, in the likes of Moser, for example, it's very, very approachable, right? So a lot of guys are, they're looking at independence and they start looking at watches that tend to be very expensive in the likes of 𝗿𝗏 and B&F or some of the other guys. But there are independent watchmakers out there in the likes of Moser, which are actually very, very approachable. Batgirl, not that there's much to say about Batgirls nowadays, but one thing I found out actually yesterday is that, we saw the Rolex dip, right? And what happens after a dip, things tend to stabilize, and the minute that they stabilize, they tend to go up a little bit or sometimes a lot. But for the most part, the way you know something has stabilized, i.e. like this Batgirl, 2 weeks ago, we were looking around for them. There were, depending condition, et cetera, they were in the wholesale market around $16,000. And this week we couldn't find one for less than 17. 17 to 18 is what we're being quoted. So that goes to tell me that in the very least, I'm starting to see actual signs of that stabilization. I mean, we've been seeing it over the last 30 days. Things have been stable. Sales have picked back up. But it's also nice to see that once you see that tiny little jump, no matter how little incremental it may be, those are good signs for stabilization of the market. We have a Nick watch. Nick, would you mind, please?
So what do you know about free diving?
I actually set the world record for juniors in free diving back in 1988.
Really?
I dove 2.5 meters in my bathtub. Anyway, go ahead. I don't know about free diving. I know what free diving is.
Well, this watch was actually made for 8-time world champion freediver Jacques Ellul. I butchered his name, that's fine.
This is what we need Marco sometimes.
We need Marco. But Jacques actually had a huge inspiration on how this watch was designed, and pretty much how it works, because it's how you would work a chronograph with the top pusher. And after a minute, one of the first circle will actually turn red, and it keeps going down to 7.
So for me, if I'm a diver and I am literally risking my life to free dive very, very, very deep, I probably would instill a digital watch. You can actually see the circles filling in. If you're going to use a mechanical watch, and I'm assuming he was sponsored by Omega, so he had to wear an Omega. And when they made first of all, the thickness of this watch, obviously it can withstand pretty good depth. As far as the indicator is concerned, that's about as loud as you can see both the seconds hand as well as the minutes as they're filling in. So definitely a cool watch. Thanks, Nick. You know what, I'm gonna open up this Vacheron first, and then I'll leave my favorite AP to last. So Vacheron is not just about overseas, right? Their patrimonial line is, again, goes in line with what I said about Moser, right? What was the word I was using?
Approachable.
Very, very approachable. So you can own a precious metal Vacheron at a very approachable price. Take this as the Patek 𝗕𝗨𝗬, and if Marco was here, he would say with just a better movement and better quality watchmaking. But that's what this is. It's an approachable, sort of that entry level Vacheron in a precious metal. So Vacheron arguably is not just about the overseas. Went through the roof and they have come down when the market corrected. These watches did not suffer. They will be trading for more or less the same thing for quite some time.
Somebody asked, what do you think the future of the overseas line is for next year?
I think the future of the overseas line is going to be exactly where it's at. It's going to be their most popular selling line still. You're not going to see, it has stabilized, right? The stuff is trading at list slightly over depending on the model, and this is where they're going to stay, because look, at the end of the day, anybody out there that's been waiting on an overseas from their AD, they will not turn it down at list, and that's what tells me that on a secondary market you're going to still see that stuff trading slightly over list. And what I would love for them to do is I would love for them to piggyback off the re-release of the 222 and make an actual line out of it. A little bit more sporty, a bit more different. Go with the design of the 222 and create a secondary sports line from that, meaning start making stuff out of stainless steel. Make the 222 in stainless steel, not just the yellow gold. Last but not least and special is we have one Juan Pablo Montoya. I'm not going to get into the history of Juan Pablo Montoya as a driver, but I am going to get into the fact that the limited edition Montoya, this is an era of the trios, right, where they made everything by threes. Titanium, usually titanium, rose gold, and platinum. It was the Montoya that kicked off the craze of the limited edition offshores. And yours truly was kind of responsible for that, because early on in my career, I realized that there's a market to be made. There is such a thing as creating a market, even in the secondary market. And the limited edition offshores were a perfect example. It was at the time where bigger and better was just starting out. A year or two prior to that, you couldn't give away an offshore. People were going, are you crazy? That's so bulky, that's so big, who the hell's gonna wear that? You could pick up one of the original offshores that came out $4,000 to $5,000, right? But again, back then the retails were about 12, 13. But long story short, when they started doing the limited editions, going back to the end of days, and when they did the first trio, which was the Montoya, this is when I said, wait a minute, the titanium offshore retails for $14,900. I think this is a watch that, even if bought at list, can fetch over list. It came out of the gate at $14,700, then they quickly raised the retail prices to $17,900. I sold one for $20,000, $22,000, $24,000, $25,000, and this watch made its way all the way up to, I'm gonna say in the highest titanium Montoya was like in the $35,000, $38,000 price range, brand new. And of course, there was the rose gold counterpart, a watch that originally retailed for $38,000 and change, then jumped to like $41,000 or $42,000. They were trading for $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, as high as $80,000 for a mint example. And today they've come down to that mid 50s mark, which to me makes this a stupid smoking deal because of the way this watch looks. They paid attention to a lot of things. Unfortunately, this thing is on a rubber strap. It's not on its original strap, but its original strap is actually a leather stitch strap, which I'm sure we have somewhere around the office. And everything about this watch was about racing. If you look at the carbon plate, if you look at the carbon bezel, the carbon covers on the pushers, the pushers themselves mimic the wheels. The stitching on the strap, people always ask me, well, is it the stitching on the seats? I'm like, no, those mimicking the stitching on his race suit. So everything and anything about this watch screamed racing. I mean, look at the crown even. People ask me, what's your favorite limited edition offshore? And I said, when it comes to a gold version, I go with the Montoya. When it comes to the titanium version, I go with the next trio, which was the Barrichello. By the way, both of them were at the Brazilian Grand Prix for F1. They were standing next to each other. It was a pretty cool thing. If I was there, I'd probably want that picture. With that said, this is going to conclude today's unboxing. YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.